Well, hey guys, I want to welcome you to the first episode of the new and improved Impactus podcast, where myself, Jordan Harnham, Dean Brenton, and Chris Walker spend some time unpacking some of the issues, questions, and topics that men are facing in today's cultural moment. Our hope is that this podcast will encourage you in your walk with God, help you become a better man in your family, in your workplace, and as a friend. And all in all, we want you to become more like Jesus. And so, on today's podcast, we are discussing this phenomenon that we are seeing across headlines and in local churches and amongst friends, this idea that young men are coming back to faith. Yeah, have you heard it? Have you seen the headlines? That there seems to be this renewed interest in the person of Jesus from young men. So on today's podcast, we discuss a number of things, but mainly, is this something that we're seeing here at Impactus? Is it something we're seeing in our own local churches? And what do we do with the men that are coming? And how do we ensure we disciple these young men well to be mature disciples of Jesus? And also, we spend some time kind of thinking about the different guardrails we should consider as we celebrate this incredible time in our history. That and so much more on today's podcast. And so let's jump right in. Well, Dean and Chris, we are live on our first podcast together, man. I'm so excited to have both of you guys here today. How are you feeling about this new thing we're doing?
The band is back together. It's fantastic. It's going to be epic. I love it.
Yeah, thanks for having me in for the first time. This is, I'm joining the party, it feels like.
Yeah, it's funny. Dean, you said the band is back together. Okay, I know you play the keys. I play the drums. But Chris, what are you bringing to the table?
I play the keys, and I led worship for a lot of years as a singer as well.
I don't think we knew that. Did you know that, Dean?
I did. I think I knew a little bit of music was there, but I didn't know that much. So maybe there is a band thing going on.
Been a very long time.
Like Shine, Jesus, Shine type of long time?
Right. Yeah. Late 80s, early 90s.
Love it. As the deer.
As the deer. Well, gentlemen, to kick things off here with this podcast platform, today we're talking about an article, and more than the article, but just kind of the ideas that the article kind of talked about. Dean, you sent it to us from Relevant magazine, and it's been a while since I've actually checked out Relevant, but they had this article that basically said, why so many men are suddenly all in on faith. And one of the quotes says this: for the first time, Gen Z men are now more religious than Gen Z women, challenging the long-standing pattern of women being more religiously engaged. I'm curious, Dean, right off the hop, why did you feel this was necessary to chat about?
Well, I thought Relevant was relevant still, number one, but no, I thought I've seen the same kind of story reiterated in multiple media locations, in the mainstream media as well, like newspaper, online stories. Like, it's been emerging, and it seems to be a trend that obviously we're interested in, being a ministry to men. And what does that mean for us as well? And is there a legitimate resurgence of guys who are interested, like young guys who are interested in the faith? And what does that mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Chris, I'm curious, when you saw the email come through and the kind of the title of the article, kind of what crossed your mind? Is this something that you are seeing and people chatting about?
Yeah, it was my first thought was, oh, it's kind of nice to have some data that backs up what I have seen in my own church. And so I've been with Impactus for 2 years now, and before that I was a pastor. And even a couple years ago, we were starting to notice, wow, there's kind of this revival, if you want to call it that, of young people getting really excited about Jesus. And some of them were church kids who'd been there for their whole lives, and it was like Jesus was becoming real to them for the first time. Some of them were people who had no connection to church, who their friends were leading to Jesus, or they were just feeling a pull to come back to church. And so anecdotally, certainly I witnessed it as a pastor. And then in my church that I attend now, we've seen the same thing. So to see that it's widespread was actually pretty cool, pretty exciting, that it's not just happening in one spot. It sounds like across the board, there's this movement happening.
Yeah. It's funny. I pastor a small church on the side. And honestly, the amount of young men that are just walking through the doors is like really, it's just like actually striking how many just guys are coming and sitting by themselves. When a couple of years ago, if you told me that a young man was going to be interested in coming to church, sitting by himself, uninvited by someone else, I would never have believed you. And so it's like, what's going on there? Dean, have you seen it anecdotally in your region?
Yeah, I've heard it in the similar story with pastors and leaders that we're interacting with, but I think we've seen it more vividly, probably at our own conferences. We're seeing, a marked difference, say from 2 or 3 years ago to today. In the last run of conferences we did, like so many young men who were coming, participating, excited about being there, bringing their friends. It was notable and exciting that to have the young blood in the mix of things and just bringing some energy and yeah, their curiosity and all those things. So we've seen it for sure at our the events that we're running.
Yeah, and the stats in particular to these things, Axios says that Gen Z men now outpace millennial men in weekly attendance. I know in the UK you're seeing a significant surge in attendance numbers in particular. And I was listening to a podcast with this Orthodox, I guess a priest, Orthodox leader, Father Andrew Damick, and he actually said that 50% of his church attendees and members have joined in the last 5 years. Many of them are young men, and so we're seeing across the board, anecdotally, statistically, and just kind of in our own families and neighborhoods. And so I'm curious around you guys, why do you think this is happening? What's happening kind of below the surface of all these numbers and stories?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of forces at work. We don't have to go too far back in our memory banks just to think about the last 4 or 5 years and the isolation that we all experienced through the pandemic. And I think young guys in particular were probably hit pretty hard during that time. And I mean, just the constant barrage through surveys and responses and interactions of loneliness and isolation that guys are still feeling, I think has driven them to maybe consider finding some places where they can find some community and some meaning again. And so, I do think in recent years, it certainly has flowed out of that difficult time that we all experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add or emphasize maybe that whole loneliness piece, right? Which everybody is talking about in the ministry world and in the secular world, the loneliness epidemic, especially among men. And we've talked about it lots at Impactus as well. And so, yeah, I think there's a pull to community that has to be a part of it. Obviously, just looking to engage differently than just online, which, I think I might be too hopeful in saying this, but I think we're starting to see the wheels come off the wagon in our intense online lives. Like people more and more are saying you can't just live your life there. For young men, especially who grew up with just full time, smartphones and tablets and gaming and all these things. Those things are great, but you can't live your whole life there. And so this call to community, and then it has to be the pandemic in part, I think, because beyond just the young men, we've seen lots of people come to church out of the pandemic as well. And I wonder for many if some of it was just after a year or two of lockdowns and being so isolated, we just got to get out again. We got to find people again. And then, of course, we can't just lay aside that a lot of people have been praying for this for a really long time. And so there's something that the Holy Spirit must be doing for it to be so widespread, right? Like in different countries and different denominations, to hear the Orthodox, priest saying the exact same thing as the Pentecostal church is saying is pretty cool. So I think that's part of it too, is the Holy Spirit is just up to something in this generation.
Yeah, a study that we've written about the male friendship recession actually says that men with zero close friends rose from 3% in 1990 to 15% in 2020. Like that, those are staggering numbers. And so clearly, that's in 2020. And so given a couple, even 5 years later, we're seeing kind of, as you said, Chris, the wheels starting to fall off there. And it's no doubt that the community of faith in church offers something that is hard to find, especially as you graduate high school. Like, I think maybe young men are kind of disenfranchised with like what they've been told is going to bring fulfillment in regards to community. So like the bar, the club, those are not producing kind of the fruits of community that maybe they're really longing and hoping for. And as you mentioned, online community, after a while, I'm sure begins to fall a little short. What other areas of maybe the Christian or spiritual experience do you think guys are secretly longing for, that maybe they're hoping somehow, somewhere, that putting their finger on faith or following Jesus or joining a church, whether Orthodox or more charismatic Pentecostal, what other things do you think men are kind of drawn to and hoping that the church fulfills?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat age old, but like meaning and purpose in life is still a real thing. And I think guys who, in the past few years in particular, have maybe struggled, like, why does my life count? What am I here for? Are searching for in places for that kind of meaning and connection to something larger. It does play into the socio-cultural slash political kind of call for young men that's been out there as well, trying to invite them into different spaces to try to capture their attention as well and give them something larger to live for, which is not always positive. But it's really cool that a lot of guys are merging back into the church lane, and we've even seen stats from like the Bible Society of the numbers of guys that are picking up scriptures and reading scriptures again. Like, that's amazing. And so, yeah, I think there's a meaning piece and a purpose piece that is guys are wrestling with, and the church obviously has something to say about that in a really profound way.
Yeah, I think that's when you think of some of the secular examples, right, that are booming, these influencers who have, hundreds of millions of young men engaging with them, and some of them aren't terrible, and some of them I would say are pretty terrible, at least from a biblical perspective. But there is a hunger for something, and I appreciate where guys like Jordan Peterson, who you might like him or not like him, and certainly we would probably disagree with him on some stuff, but he is very clearly giving young men, here's how to be a man, right? Here are things that men do, and here are things that you should do, and he breaks it down into like, hey, like make sure your place is tidy and make sure you've got a good job and go find a woman, and he's talking about just very practical stuff that was maybe, I don't know if it was maybe a bit more implicit in previous generations, but it feels like it's maybe not talked about as clearly in the same way, and probably not by the church nearly as clearly over this last generation. So there is something where I think young men are looking for someone to show them, what does it mean to be a man? Like, what does
Yeah.
a man do? Like, just give me a push, in direction that's going to be something that helps me to grow into this.
Yeah, I think it was like the New York Times. I could be wrong about this, and so don't quote me. That talked about how some say that Christianity is the last institution not formally skeptical of men, or religion is not the last institution, is the last institution that's not formally skeptical of men. And I think over the past couple of years, and especially in light of Me Too and things that happened, and there was maybe a magnifying glass put on men, and in many ways, rightfully so. I think men just didn't know how to men a little bit, right? And what's my place with all this energy and this ambition that I have, and culture's telling me I have to be this way, but I have these desires and leanings to do this. And so when you have a kind of someone like Jordan Peterson, or you see these other personalities that are not even worth mentioning, kind of giving that purpose and meaning and permission for men to maybe lean into some of these attributes or characteristics, or maybe just callings that men feel deep within themselves, you can see how men might resonate with it, especially when they've looked at the secular society that they've drank the Kool-Aid and kind of fallen into, and they're saying, this is not actually making me feel any better about myself or the world that I'm living in. The problem is, as you said, Chris, that some of these voices are not kind of the ones that are going to point them in the right direction. And so one thing I was reading recently was talking about how the book of Proverbs says a lot of the same things that like these other voices are saying, but no one's reading the book of Proverbs to young men anymore.
Right.
And how it talks about responsibility and wisdom. And actually, one of the things I think Jordan Peterson does well is he actually gives the Bible credibility to a young man, saying there's wisdom in here for living. Now, does he miss the gospel through it a lot? He does. But he has given kind of the scriptures some credibility around actually having wisdom for living, for actually being a man. And I think, man, that's what I think young men are really looking for. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I say that part's fascinating that came out of Jordan Peterson's stuff, right? All of a sudden he's talking about the Bible all the time. And I think that just that clarity of yeah, I wish it was more Jesus-y and not quite so mythologized, which he tends to do with it. But I do hope some young men will pick up the Bible and start reading it, right? Because this influential man is telling them to do it. And I hope God meets them there. I think the tricky part is, um, when you're trying to say, okay, so now what does that look like as a Christ follower, right? So there's probably universal stuff like, yeah, most men want to get married and should have a job. I think for so long culturally we kind of blurred the lines of the genders almost to the point of like, well, there's no difference whatsoever. And we certainly don't believe that at Impactus. But I've met young men who have said to me, like, I honestly don't know how to ask a girl out anymore without being accused of harassment, right? Like I don't know how to do that. And I think that's where the dating apps have become so popular, right? Because you don't have to interact at all. You just click a button and the app will do the work for you on deciding if you're going to move forward or not. Um, but I think for the young guys who are just saying, yeah, I do have a desire to get married and have kids, and I do have a desire to have a career, and how do I do that? And as you said, Jordan, so much that came out in Me Too was important to come out, right? There was a lot of sides of masculinity that rightfully got called out by the culture, and that was good. And sort of a negative side effect of that was it became, okay, so what is a man then? If we've already said, okay, a man shouldn't be a bully and shouldn't be domineering and shouldn't treat women a certain way, and we would agree with all those things, but what is a man? And there wasn't the counter positive. Like, what's a positive view of what masculinity is? And that's where guys like Jordan Peterson and others have stepped into that gap and said, well, here's what men can do, and don't be ashamed of being a man. Go and live in this direction. And I think that's just an important shift that needed to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard someone even talk about the masculinity piece and how the phrase toxic masculinity was, I mean, it was coined for like a lot over the past couple of years. But this person reframed it as immature masculinity and mature masculinity. And I thought that was actually a helpful reframe in some ways, because a lot of the toxic masculinity are actually just men who are still behaving like boys. And it's not that their manhood is toxic. It's actually no one's given them a greater vision or a picture of what the man can actually become or be. And that's where I think the church can speak into it, and it's for some reason, I don't know, maybe we've gotten far enough away from like the scientific method. And it just seems like there's a lot of room for nuance and mystery in people's lives, especially around Gen Z right now. There's a lot of openness to spirituality in particular. And I think the church has to capitalize on this. And you're seeing kind of Christianity go mainstream, right? You got Joe Rogan, Andrew Schultz, you've got every major podcaster talking about Christianity, and in particular Wes Huff, who's a good Toronto boy from our neighborhood.
Yeah.
He's kind of making Christianity as a viable option for actually not just being helpful, like maybe someone like Peterson might say, but actually true. And that's where, Christianity, I think the church, and maybe if we want to talk about opportunities, the church must not miss that part, that the Bible is not just a helpful way of living, but is actually true. And it's not just a guidebook for being a good man. It'll actually transform your entire life. And that's where I think the church really got to double down, is not miss this opportunity and just making it more moralism, but actually start beginning to talk about actually this will turn your life upside down in ways you're not even anticipating or looking for, but it can happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, the danger is in some of the voices are calling guys to something other than the thing that will give them ultimate purpose and meaning and fulfillment in life, right? So they're called to, make it in life, to do good economically, the capitalistic drive in society, to power, to hedonism, whatever. When, and I guess the danger in the thought guys are coming back to church is that they may be coming back to a spirituality or a form of religion, when, as you just said, like, there's a truth there. There's a wrestling with giving your life to Christ, surrendering to his lordship, that is transformative and gives you ultimate meaning in life. That's the desire and hope that, we have, and that we want to see, not just to pull up your bootstraps and be a better man, but how can we be like Jesus, live like Jesus, and influence the world like Jesus? And so I think that's the call that needs to resound through, all that we're doing through the church, to point those guys that are interested, that have a genuine curiosity right now, to say, yeah, the Holy Spirit is at work, and he is inviting you into a deeper life, like something you've never experienced before, that'll not only transform you, but your family, your workplace, your community. I mean, that's the hope of the gospel.
Yeah, because the danger is that we could possibly just go so far back into the past, right? Of a culture and ways of living that we don't necessarily want to get back to. We want to imagine a new future with kind of Jesus centered masculinity at the center of it all. And sometimes being a man that's like Jesus is not necessarily the man that, we always like to talk about, Jesus flipping tables and, but a lot of it is just being a safe, secure man that people feel safe being around. I mean, you think about the people Jesus hung around with, like the woman at the well, or like the woman caught in adultery, or, the widows and the orphans and children. He was a safe man to be around, but he's also the man that said, turn the other cheek. And so, I think the opportunity, I don't know, Chris, you can speak to this. You've pastored, you're a leader. What do you think the opportunity is here for churches to not miss this moment and to really encourage men to kind of keep going in this moment?
Yeah, I think certainly to be talking to the young men who are in your midst and just listening, right? And what is their story and what are they hungry for? What are they looking for? I think to your point, Jordan, to present Jesus as this is obviously our ideal in every way, but partly our ideal masculinity, right? And so he was incredibly strong and yet also incredibly gentle, right? And he was bold and courageous, but he was also restrained. And he spoke his mind and spoke the truth, but he also was wise in how he used his words. He was a safe place for everybody, especially even including women, especially in that culture. And yet he also had no problem going after those in power who were corrupt. And so he's this crazy paradox, and we're never going to hit that perfection in this life. But to hold up Jesus as the model of this is what a man looks like, and most of us, I think we all tend to kind of make Jesus into an image of ourselves a little bit, right? So we say, well, I'm more gentle, so I like the gentle Jesus, or I speak my mind and I like the Jesus that told off the Pharisees or whatever. But to use him as the model to say, okay, there's going to be some ways that you're kind of maybe naturally a bit more like him, but where do you need to grow now as a man who looks like Jesus?
Yeah.
So if you're really gentle and safe, maybe you need to work on speaking up when it's important. And if you're really bold with your words, maybe you need to work on being the safe place. And if you like the flipping tables, maybe you need to work on the guy who got alone with his heavenly Father and went off and just was quiet. But there's a place to grow for all of us in Jesus. And so I
Yeah.
think for young men especially, just to say, all right, this is the one you're actually looking for. It's not Jordan Peterson. It's not even the book of Proverbs, as much as we revere that. Like, you're looking for Jesus, and he's the model of everything you want to be in life. And so what does it look like to be a man who looks like him?
Yeah, no, that's so good. Dean, any thoughts on what opportunity the church faces here to capitalize on kind of this unique moment?
Yeah, I was just thinking about something you just said about the examples of Jesus, the woman at the well, the woman caught in adultery, because there is a counter narrative too to this return to men coming to church, young men, but there is also the reality that the stats are saying that young women are actually leaving the church at a much higher rate. And what would Jesus' response to that be, right? Like, we
Right.
want to celebrate, yes, absolutely. Guys are coming back, and praise God for that curiosity. Um, but I think he'd be just as concerned, what's going on, and if there's something culturally, politically that has turned young ladies off from the church as a dad of 4 girls, that should concern us as well, because we need to be men who build the right kind of culture inside the church that invites men and women to come to know Jesus in the full expression of that. So I think there's that safe piece you talked about that really resonated for me, that we need to be that kind of men, just not concerned about ourselves, like, I'm going to be a better man. I'm going to be safe. I'm going to be someone for everyone. And so I think there's something powerful in there as well that can speak to both cultural realities that are happening right now.
Yeah, no, and I think that is a wise thing to kind of temper and balance this conversation, because we don't want to be talking in 10 years the conversation we've been having about men the last 10 years, right? About where are all and then we'll be saying, where are all the women in churches, right? And so that's just a good thing to be considering. I think the one thing that I would say to churches is to listen very carefully to what the men are saying they're looking for and needing, because sometimes what we think they're looking for and needing is not actually what they're looking for and needing. And so let me just give you this example. For many years, in regards to church trends, there was the thought that in order to reach young people, we need to be cool and hip, and we need to be very practical with our teaching, and our space needs to be very entertaining. But from me and what I'm experiencing anecdotally, like we have young men coming to our church because we have a cross in the sanctuary. Like, I know that sounds silly, but we have men coming and asking, "Can we do communion every week?" Like, and we just have a piano and a singer. Like, it's very humble. We're at our church at the moment, but that just reminds me that what we thought was cool is almost the new cringe, and what they're looking for is not entertainment. They're looking for transcendence. They're looking for something that feels bigger and beyond themselves. Hence, why maybe a lot of young men are being really drawn to more traditional or
Your
practices,
Orthodox friend, right? That you were talking to.
Orthodox
Yeah.
or Catholicism
That's
is booming
remarkable.
right
Yeah.
now. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a time like you just said, like drawn to something bigger. We assume bigger was the big show, the big, light, smoke, rock music, the whole thing, right? And I think there is actually a resistance to that. Guys are looking for something authentic, something that it is transcendent. It is pointing to something that you can't reproduce in a 45-minute service or an event, because it is the presence of God that can't be replaced by anything else. So I think there's a tie to that as well.
yeah. I'm thinking like, our dating world has been replaced really with porn, right? Our finances and gaining wealth has been replaced by crypto. Our communities and our circles have been replaced by Discord and online chat rooms. But the one thing that like the church has an edge on is a space that gathers on a weekly rhythm. It's incarnational in the sense that it's human on human. You're right there in front of each other, but also you have an opportunity to introduce them to the living God. And
Mhm.
and I just think we cannot miss that part. And so I would just say, like, don't think that, we've got all these men coming. Now is the time to double down on cool. It might be actually the time to double down on Christ and like just center him in your teaching, center him in your preaching and communications, and just do as Paul said, right? Christ, I preach Christ and Christ crucified. And in
Mhm.
my senses, from what I'm gathering from men, that's why they're coming to church. And they're not coming because of, my teaching or cool skinny jeans or cool videos. They're coming, they're waking up at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning, coming because they want something legit. So I just think we've really got to pay attention to that need. Well, guys, we've been chatting for a while now. I'm sure we've solved all the problems around this issue and
Perfect.
and every solution, but I'm just curious. Any final words to maybe Chris, if you can speak to the young man that's listening and is maybe spiritually curious or is maybe listening to these podcasts and is saying maybe there's something in it for me. And I'm just curious for you, Dean, maybe thinking of maybe an older generation of grandfathers or fathers that are listening. What encouragements would you have to these guys that are listening to just say what to do with all this?
Yeah, for the young man, I would just say you're in a good place. You're moving in the right direction, and that's just so exciting to see. And the fact that you're curious and seeking and searching is exactly right. We believe here at Impactus, obviously, that ultimately Jesus is what you're looking for, and I would just encourage you, if you're not in a church, to find a church near you. Try a bunch. Like, don't feel like you need to just lock into one right away, but try a bunch of different churches and see what they teach and how they engage in worship and those sorts of things. I do agree with what you said, Jordan. I think there is a movement right now to really engage with church where it feels holy, right? Where it feels different than everything else, and not just that feels the same. And so that being said, I think God gave us different churches for a reason, and different ones will connect with different people in different seasons. And so, ultimately the searching online is a great start, but we would love to see you connect with a community. And for those of you who are in that community, please don't stop searching and being hungry, and talk to your pastor and ask a lot of questions, and find someone in your church that you can chat with. And I'm sure there's someone there who would love to meet with you, because I just love seeing every young person walk into the church at my age. So, there's just an excitement in the church around the world right now for what's happening in this generation. So it's very exciting to see.
Yeah, being the old guy, I um I just encourage older men to think and remember when they were younger and the things that they valued about like church and finding a place, and to look at the guys that are coming, because some of them might not look like we do, and they might be tatted up and, just not our typical, friend group and things like that. But to be hospitable, I visited a church not that long ago, and I literally went in on the Sunday morning and left. I think I had one handshake the entire time. I just went in and went out. I'm like, okay, and I think guys are going to be really engaged or turned off by the hospitable presence that we have. And I think the other thing I'd say is let's be curious. Like, let's hear their stories. Let's hear what's going on in their lives. And there's a real opportunity for the older generation to step into being mentors and godly examples of what it means to serve Jesus. I was just reading a stat just last week about mental health for men in Canada. And I mean, there's about 20 million men in Canada. 1 million men in Canada, stats say, are wrestling with severe depression. Like, that's astounding. And so maybe by being curious and hospitable and welcoming, the guys who are struggling and the guys who are not struggling will find a safe place around us and a community to belong to. And it'll only strengthen our churches, and it'll strengthen our relationships, and it'll build the future for the next generation as well, because what they learn from us, they can pass on. So, yeah, I think there's just a real amazing opportunity for the older generation to pass the baton in a really cool way to make sure the faith gets transmitted in a really lasting, powerful way.
Oh, it's good. It's good. Yeah, guys, thanks so much for speaking on this. I think we could speak on this a lot more, but that's it for today. And so, guys, thanks for listening, and we hope this has been a blessing to you. And in the meantime, be praying for those young men that that maybe have yet to show interest, and we are believing that they too will come to know Jesus like the many other young men around the world. All right, guys, that's all for now. Thanks.